A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Where History Breathes. The December wind cut through Harper Montgomery's jacket as she descended into the ruins of Castle Greyfang, her boots crunching against broken stone and centuries of accumulated debris. The fortress that once dominated the northern English landscape was now little more than skeletal remains, a monument to the passage of time and the inevitability of decay. She welcomed the bite of cold air. It kept her focused, grounded, prevented her mind from wandering to places it had no business going. It has been 3 years since she buried her grandmother, and still Harper found herself working through the holidays instead of dwelling on empty apartments and shorter days. The thesis could have waited. The photographs of medieval fortifications could have been postponed. But Harper had learned long ago that forward motion was easier than stillness. Forward motion meant not thinking about the fact that she was utterly alone in the world, that her family had shrunk to nothing, that the only person who had ever truly known her was gone. She pulled her camera from her pack, checking the lens before lifting it to photograph the eastern wall. The afternoon light caught the ancient stonework at an angle that made the architectural details sing. This was what Harper loved about her work, not the people or the theories, but the structures themselves. Castles told stories through their design. Every crenellation, every arrow slit, every carefully placed tower spoke of intentions and fears, and the desire to hold power in an uncertain world. Her phone buzzed. A text from her advisor. Holiday check-in. "How's the research?" Harper typed back. "Good. Very productive. We'll have preliminary sections ready after New Year." It was a lie. She had been stalled for weeks, caught in the details, unable to move forward. But honesty had never been particularly useful in academia. The ruins extended deeper than most visitors realized. Harper had discovered that through her research, through hours spent in archives and cross-referencing old maps, most people saw the outer walls and called it done, but beneath the crumbling stones, beneath the bramble and the decay, there was more. There had to be. She found the entrance to the crypts as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The opening was partially concealed by fallen rubble and an aggressive tangle of winter vines. Harper cleared the debris away with determination, shining her LED flashlight into the darkness below. The beam illuminated a descent of stone steps, still solid despite the centuries. This was not in any historical record she had accessed. This was new. This was hers. The crypt was smaller than she expected. The air cold, and still in a way that made her skin prickle. Torch sconces lined the walls. Empty now, of course. And the stone beneath her feet was worn smooth by countless footsteps, across decades or centuries. She ran her hand along the wall, feeling the texture, imagining the hands that had carved the symbols into the stone. The symbols, that was what stopped her cold. They covered the walls in intricate patterns, some obviously ritualistic, others that might have been decorative. Harper had studied enough medieval texts to recognize Old English, Latin fragments, symbols that predated both. But these were different, more deliberate, more purposeful. She pulled out her laptop, balanced it on a relatively flat section of floor, and began photographing everything, cross-referencing with her digital archive of historical texts. One section of the wall seemed to have instructions, a sequence of words or phrases arranged in a specific order. Using her translation application, Harper began working through them. Bloodline Keeper, Temporal Walker, Moon's Daughter, Convergence at Full Peak. Between the ages, find what was meant. The phrasing was archaic and poetic, the kind of thing one might find in prophecy or legend. Harper's rational mind cataloged it as ceremonial text, probably related to some long-forgotten ritual or religious practice specific to this location. Medieval people believed in remarkably specific things. Bloodlines that carried magic, cosmic alignments that affected human destiny, the idea that some people were fundamentally different from others. Her grandmother had believed those things too. Harper remembered being 12 years old, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen, while the old woman pressed a cup of tea into her hands and said things like, "Your blood is old, Harper. Older than you understand. There are things in our family that you'll inherit, even if you don't believe in them now." Harper had dismissed it as the eccentricities of an aging woman, holding on to folklore and superstition. She had chosen education, science, rational thought. She had become a historian because she wanted to understand the past through evidence and documentation, not through the magical thinking that had defined her family. But standing in this crypt, reading these words aloud as academic exercise, as pure linguistic curiosity, something shifted in the air. The temperature dropped precipitously. Her breath became visible, small clouds of white that dissipated into the darkness. Harper's rational mind screamed that it was a draft, that crypts were naturally cold, that her body was simply responding to fear and adrenaline. But her hands were trembling as she held the flashlight, and the beam of light began to flicker despite the battery indicator showing full charge. She read the sequence again, louder this time, each word distinct and deliberate. The timing was wrong, she realized. Midnight on a full moon, the text had indicated. It was only late afternoon, and while tonight would bring a full moon, the actual peak wasn't until well after dark. The wrongness of attempting the ritual at the wrong time should have been comforting. It should have proven that nothing would happen, that this was all elaborate medieval superstition with no basis in reality. Instead, Harper found herself checking her phone for the time, calculating when midnight would arrive. Her grandmother's voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Your blood is old, Harper." She set up her equipment in the crypt, creating a makeshift camp on the least damp section of stone. She had done stranger things for research. She had slept in worse conditions. The crypt was dark and cold and filled with symbols that made her skin prickle, but it was also undisturbed and historically significant. If this space held secrets, Harper intended to document them. As the afternoon faded toward evening, she downloaded more information onto her laptop, cross-referencing every symbol, every phrase, building a comprehensive database of what she was seeing. The translation app struggled with some of the language, offering multiple interpretations, but certain phrases kept recurring. Time walker, bloodline keeper, between the ages, convergence of cycles. The more she read, the more she understood that this wasn't random superstition. This was deliberate. Someone, many someones across generations, had carefully preserved instructions, ritual language, specific requirements. The precision of it suggested purpose. Harper didn't believe in magic. She didn't believe in bloodline destiny or cosmic alignment, or the idea that some people could transcend the normal limitations of reality. But she believed in history. She believed in evidence. And the evidence before her suggested that people in the medieval period had believed in something specific enough to encode it into stone, to hide it beneath castle ruins, to preserve it across centuries. When midnight came, Harper was ready. She had her phone set to record. Her camera was positioned to capture the moment. Her laptop was running, logging timestamps and environmental data. She was a scientist conducting an experiment. That was all this was. She read the sequence one final time, standing in the exact center of the crypt where the symbols seemed to converge. Midnight, marked by her phone's atomic clock precision. Full moon overhead, though she couldn't see it through the stone and earth. The moment the final word left her lips, the world changed. There was no sound, no explosion of light, no magical fanfare. Instead, Harper felt something pull at her from the inside. A sensation like being drawn through water, like drowning but backward, like every cell of her body was being called somewhere else. Pain bloomed in the back of her skull, sharp and intense. She tried to move, tried to reach for her phone or her flashlight, but her body wouldn't respond. The last thing she registered before consciousness fractured was the horrifying realization that something in her blood had recognized that ritual, had answered the call, had agreed to the translation her grandmother had been trying to explain since Harper was 12 years old. Then there was only darkness, and the sensation of being unmade and remade simultaneously. When Harper's eyes opened, nothing was the same. She was lying on cold stone, but the air was different, warmer. It smelled of wood smoke and animal fur, and something she couldn't quite identify, but that made her primitive brain register as predator nearby. Her crypts were gone. In their place was a space that looked similar in structure, but completely transformed in condition. The torches on the walls were lit, flickering with real flame. The symbols seemed to pulse in the firelight, and the walls themselves were intact, solid, supported by wooden beams and architectural elements that belonged to an era before medieval fortification techniques became standardized. Harper scrambled backward, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The room around her was clearly old, but not ruined, not abandoned. Used. She pushed herself up on trembling legs and moved toward what appeared to be an exit, trying to process the reality of what she was experiencing. The corridor beyond the crypt was lit by more torches. The stone was worn smooth by countless footsteps, and at the far end, she could see light that seemed to come from outdoors. Harper moved toward it, each step deliberate, her mind cycling through possibilities. This was some kind of historical recreation site. That was the only logical explanation. Someone had reconstructed this space for educational purposes or tourist attraction. The attention to detail was impressive, but it explained what she was seeing. It had to. She emerged into a courtyard that extended beneath open sky, and her theories collapsed entirely. The castle above her was intact, complete. Every stone in place, every tower rising toward a sky that was rapidly darkening as evening approached. The courtyard was bustling with activity. People in medieval clothing moving between buildings, horses stamping at a trough, smoke rising from what appeared to be a functioning kitchen. The banner flying from the highest tower was the Grey Fang symbol, a silver wolf on a black field. Harper stood frozen, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were showing her. This was impossible. Castles did not spontaneously rebuild themselves. Historical recreations did not include this level of authenticity. The smell of animal dung, the sound of people speaking in an accent that was English but not modern English, the sight of guards in armor that showed genuine wear and damage rather than polished museum pieces. A guard spotted her. Then another. They stared at the woman in jeans and a leather jacket, holding a strange rectangular object, and looking like she had been pulled from another reality entirely. Which, Harper realized with sudden and terrible clarity, she had. She was turning to run when hands grabbed her from behind, strong hands that hauled her backward with efficiency and purpose. Harper struggled, adrenaline flooding her system, but the guards holding her were trained and patient. One of them said something to the other in a dialect that Harper's translator app could not possibly process. They dragged her through the courtyard toward what appeared to be the main hall, and Harper's modern mind finally accepted what her instincts had been screaming since she woke in that crypt. She was not in 2025 anymore. She had no idea when she was, but she knew with absolute certainty that centuries had somehow passed between one moment and the next. Her hands were shaking as the guards forced her forward. Her heart was racing. Every rational thought was fragmenting. The hall was enormous, lit by a massive fireplace and dozens of candles. At the far end, on a raised platform, a man was reviewing documents with a cluster of advisors. He looked up when the guards brought Harper forward, and the moment his eyes met hers, something shifted in the air between them. It was a sensation that Harper had no framework for, no scientific explanation for. It was like recognition, but deeper. Like something in her body understood something in his, on a level that transcended consciousness. The man stood slowly, dismissing his advisors with a gesture that no one questioned. He was tall, impressively tall, with long hair that was an unusual color, almost blonde but darkened to something between gold and brown. His eyes were amber, literally glowing slightly in the candlelight. That was not possible. Eyes did not glow. They were not that shade of amber, unless they were contacts, or computer enhancement, or some other explanation that Harper was too exhausted and terrified to articulate. The man studied her the way Harper studied medieval artifacts, with the careful attention of someone trying to understand something from another world. He observed her jeans, her jacket, the laptop still clutched in her hands, and then his gaze returned to her face, and his expression shifted into something that might have been recognition. "You're not from here, are you?" he asked in English that was accented but perfectly clear. His voice was deep, almost rumbling, and held a note of authority that made even the guard straighten with respect. Harper opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She was standing in a medieval castle that had been in ruins hours ago. The man before her had eyes that glowed like an animal's, and something in her blood was singing in response to his presence in a way that suggested her grandmother had been right about far more than Harper had ever believed. The man stepped down from the platform with measured grace, moving toward Harper with a slow deliberation that suggested he was trying very hard not to frighten her further than she was already frightened. "I am Magnus," he said quietly, "and you are welcome in my castle, whether you yet understand how you came to be here or not." Before Harper could process that statement, the world tilted again, and darkness claimed her consciousness. Chapter 2. Whispers of Impossible Things. The private council chamber was lit by a single fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the 4 shifters gathered within. Magnus stood with his back to the others, arms crossed, his massive frame silhouetted against the flames. Beatrice occupied a chair near the window, her silver-streaked hair pulled back from a face that bore the scars of decades spent protecting her alpha king. Griffin, younger and less scarred, leaned against the stone wall with the casual posture of someone who had not yet learned to fear authority. And Father Oswald, the castle's oldest resident and keeper of medieval texts that predated most written histories, sat carefully in a chair that seemed to creak under the weight of his knowledge. "You felt the bond," Beatrice said. It was not a question. Her voice carried the flat certainty of someone stating observable fact. Father Oswald lifted another vellum leaf with trembling care. "There is one narrow clause the old chroniclers argued about," he murmured. "Once the wolf is fully born, a time walker cannot pass alone, but a sealed mate bond may braid 2 lives into a single anchor. If both consent and the moon repeats her convergence, the world sometimes yields." Beatrice's gaze was flint. "And if the bond is not sealed, then the path collapses behind her," the priest said. "Utterly. The moment she arrived, before you even knew who she was." Magnus finally turned from the fire, his eyes still carrying the faint amber glow of his wolf form lingering close to the surface, fixed on his beta. "I felt something. Recognition, perhaps. The kind of acknowledgement that comes when 2 pieces of a broken thing find each other again." "That is not how mate bonds work," Beatrice countered. "They are sudden, yes, but they are also clear. An alpha knows without question when his mate appears. He does not wonder. He does not theorize. He knows, which is exactly what happened," Magnus replied quietly. "I knew. The moment I saw her in my hall, wearing clothes that belong to no era I recognize, carrying objects that defy explanation. My wolf knew. And before my human mind could catch up with the certainty, the bond had already begun to sing." Father Oswald leaned forward, his ancient eyes bright with interest. "The objects she carried. You said they were unusual. Can you describe them with precision?" Griffin answered before Magnus could. "I saw them briefly before the guards brought her to the guest quarters. A small rectangle of some dark material that glowed with light from within. A mechanical device for capturing images that had no moving parts I could identify, and a larger box containing hundreds of sheets of treated parchment that contained, I do not know how to describe it, words and images that moved." The old priest's breath caught audibly. He stood with difficulty, moving toward a shelf that held dozens of leather-bound volumes stacked in careful order. His fingers traced the spines until he found what he sought, pulling down a book that looked older than the castle itself. The parchment within was yellowed and brittle, but the script was meticulous. "Travelers Between Times," Father Oswald murmured, reading the title. "I have not opened this text in decades. Most thought it was purely theological speculation, the imaginings of monks seeking to reconcile predestination with the mysteries of the divine." He began to read, his voice growing stronger as he moved through the passages. "Certain bloodlines, blessed or cursed depending on one's perspective, carry within their blood the ability to traverse the spaces between ages. They appear during specific celestial alignments, drawn by power dormant in their ancestry, and they are always, without exception, fated to their mate in the time they arrive. That is impossible," Beatrice said flatly. "Many things are impossible until they stand before you in a leather jacket made from material that does not exist in our world," Father Oswald replied calmly. The text described these travelers as time walkers, They carry bloodline markers so old that most families believe them to be merely legend. But the knowledge was preserved, carefully recorded, because monks across centuries have documented these arrivals. Magnus felt something settle in his chest, a confirmation of what his wolf had already accepted. There is a ritual, then, a way for her to return to her time. If such a ritual exists in our world, it would be recorded in these oldest texts, Father Oswald said slowly. The travelers are described as appearing during lunar peaks when their bloodline ancestry reaches convergence. The ritual that brings them here is specific. Reversing it would require knowledge we may not possess. So she is trapped, Griffin observed, not unhappily. A woman from another age with no way home. Not trapped, Beatrice corrected sharply. Strategic. We do not know her intentions. She could be a spy sent by a rival pack. She could be a witch. She could be any number of threats dressed in the guise of a vulnerable woman with impossible origins. She is terrified, Magnus said. His voice carried the weight of command that made even Beatrice straighten. I felt her fear through the beginning of the bond. She did not understand what was happening. She did not choose to arrive in my hall wearing clothes that marked her as foreign. She is genuine in her confusion. You are not thinking clearly, Beatrice protested. The mate bond has already affected your judgment. You are seeing what you wish to see, not what is actually there. Then investigate, Magnus said. Question her, all of you. Form your own conclusions. But she will be treated as a guest in this castle. She will be protected, and if anyone suggests that she be harmed or imprisoned, they will answer to me personally. The statement hung in the air like a pronouncement. Beatrice's jaw tightened, but she nodded slowly. Even in disagreement, she would obey. Magnus went to Harper's chamber in the evening, after the castle had settled into relative quiet. 2 guards stood outside her door. He dismissed them with a gesture that allowed no argument. When he entered, he found Harper standing near the window, her face illuminated by the light of torches burning in the courtyard below. She spun at the sound of the door opening, fear flashing across her features before being carefully controlled. Her hands were clenched at her sides. Her modern clothing was disheveled, and her eyes held the sharp awareness of someone trying to process information that violated every framework of understanding she possessed. Where am I? Harper asked without preamble. What year is this? And what exactly are you? Magnus was struck by the directness of her questions. No pleading, no hysteria, just cold analytical inquiry framed by someone trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond her comprehension. My name is Magnus Greyfang, and you are in my castle, in the northern territories of what you would recognize as medieval England, he said carefully. As for your other questions, I will answer them. But you must answer mine first. How did you come to be in the crypts beneath this castle? Harper explained haltingly, describing the ruins she had been studying, the symbols carved into stone, the words she had read aloud at midnight, under a full moon. Her account was clinical, academic even in the face of the impossible. She was a historian describing historical events, even though the historical event was her own temporal displacement. The ritual was designed for bloodline carriers, Magnus said when she finished. Your family carries old magic in your blood, the kind of magic that transcends normal limitations. Your presence here was not accident. The ritual recognized your bloodline and answered the call of your bloodline's purpose. That is not scientifically possible, Harper said flatly. No, Magnus agreed. It is not possible according to the science of your time. But you are no longer in your time, and science itself changes with the ages. What is impossible to you is fundamental truth here. He moved deliberately, giving her time to react, and began the transformation. It was a partial shift, enough to show her what he was without fully committing to wolf form. His eyes brightened to pure amber. His teeth elongated into primal fangs. A faint shimmer of energy surrounded him as his body began to respond to the call of his wolf, only to be held in check by conscious will. Harper pressed backward, her body responding to the primitive instinct that screamed predator at her. Her hand found the wall behind her, and she gripped it so hard her knuckles whitened. Werewolves are not real, she whispered, and yet you are watching one stand before you. Magnus replied. He allowed the shift to revert, becoming entirely human again, though the amber still lingered in his eyes. We are called shifters. We carry two forms, wolf and human, and the ability to move between them. We exist in packs, hierarchies determined by strength and bloodline. There are alphas, who lead, betas, who advise and protect, and omegas, who are rare and valuable and bound to alphas through something called the mate bond. Mate bond, Harper repeated. Her voice was hollow. You mentioned that. Twice now. When a wolf meets his intended mate, the connection is instantaneous and absolute. It is recognition at the deepest level of existence. Two souls that were meant to find each other across time itself, if necessary. Magnus paused. I felt that bond the moment you entered my hall. Harper's entire body went rigid. Her eyes moved to his face, studying him with the intensity of someone trying to determine if the person before her was truly insane or simply claiming to be. That is not possible. I do not know you. I have never met you before today. The bond does not care about acquaintance, Magnus said quietly. It cares about destiny. And according to every account written by Father Oswald and preserved in the oldest texts of this castle, your arrival here at this specific moment, under this specific celestial alignment, was precisely engineered by forces far older than either of us. We are not meeting by chance. We are meeting because your bloodline and mine have been waiting for this convergence. You are claiming that I am your mate? The word seemed to taste wrong in her mouth. Based on a feeling you experienced when you saw me in your hall, I am claiming what my wolf has already accepted, Magnus said. Whether you accept it is another matter entirely. Bonds cannot be forced. They can only be acknowledged or denied. Harper turned back to the window, her shoulders shaking slightly. When she spoke again, her voice was almost too quiet to hear. I need to go back. I have a life in my time, a career, a thesis I need to finish. I cannot simply remain in the medieval period indefinitely. According to the texts, there may be a way, Magnus said. The ritual that brought you here was specific. Its reversal would require the same specificity. But such knowledge is fragmentary. Father Oswald has spent decades studying historical accounts. Perhaps together we can reconstruct what you need. And the cost? Harper asked, her eyes still fixed on the torches burning in the darkness below. There is always a cost. Magic does not work without cost. Magnus felt the weight of the truth in his chest before he spoke it aloud. According to the oldest texts, time walkers cannot return after their blood fully manifests its true nature. Once you have transformed completely into a shifter, once your body has fully accepted what runs through your veins, the door between times closes. You will be anchored to this age forever. Harper did not turn around, but her hands began to tremble, and Magnus could hear the sharp intake of breath that preceded tears, though she fought to keep them silent. The mate bond pulled at him, demanding that he cross the space between them, that he offer comfort and protection, and the absolute certainty that he would not let her face this alone. He forced himself to remain still. She was terrified and displaced and processing information that shattered the foundation of her understanding. His need to claim her was irrelevant. Her autonomy, her right to choose her own fate, was paramount. You can return to your chambers, Magnus said carefully. You are not a prisoner here. You are a guest, and you have my protection. In the morning, if you wish to meet with Father Oswald and discuss what he has learned from the texts, the offer stands, but the choice is yours entirely. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it is worth, when the bond forms between a wolf and his mate, it is not a cage. It is a recognition of home. You carry magic in your blood, Harper Montgomery. The kind of magic that transcends time itself. The bond I felt is not my claim on you. It is the universe acknowledging that you belong here, that you were always meant to find your way to this moment. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. In the corridor, he found Griffin waiting with 2 fresh guards. How is she? Griffin asked quietly. Terrified, alone, processing the impossible, Magnus said. Ensure she is given anything she requests. If she attempts to leave the castle, do not stop her, but report her location to me immediately." "You believe she is truly your mate?" Griffin asked. "I know she is," Magnus replied. "The question is whether she will accept it before time makes the choice for her." That night, Lady Vivian Thornfield stood in the shadows of the great hall, listening to the whispered conversations of servants. Information moved through a castle like water finding cracks, unstoppable and inevitable. She had already heard about the strange woman in medieval clothes. She had heard about Magnus's order to treat her as a guest, and she had heard the name that Magnus had spoken, the designation that made her blood run cold. Mate. The word hung in her mind like poison. For years, the council had pressured Magnus to take a wife from among the noble Omega families. Vivienne had been carefully groomed for that role, positioned as the logical choice through her bloodline and status. She had imagined the ceremony, the power she would gain, the security of being Luna to the Alpha King. She had built her entire life around that expectation. And now a woman appeared from nowhere, wearing impossible clothing, carrying objects of unknown origin. And Magnus saw her as his mate. The connection that should have been Vivian's, the future that should have been hers, was being stolen by a stranger with no status and no understanding of the world she had entered. Vivian's hands clenched into fists. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, responding to the rage that flooded through her. She had survived in the politics of the pack, through careful calculation and ruthless ambition. She was not going to be displaced by some time-displaced human who could not possibly understand what she was accepting when she accepted the mate bond. By morning, Vivian had already begun to whisper seeds of doubt among the courtiers. This woman was strange. Her origins were suspicious. What if she was a spy from a rival pack? What if she was a witch using dark magic to ensnare their Alpha King? What if accepting her as mate would bring ruin to the entire kingdom? The whispers would grow. They would spread like fire through dry kindling. And by the time the council reconvened, the narrative would be written, the damage seeded. But Harper, still awake in her guest chamber as the castle settled into sleep, did not know any of this. She was too busy standing at the window, watching the moon rise above the medieval fortress, realizing with absolute certainty that her entire life had just irrevocably changed, that she was trapped in an age she only understood through academic study, and that the man who ruled this castle believed they were meant to be together. The absurdity of it was staggering. The impossibility of it was complete, and yet the truth of his words lingered in the air between them, undeniable and heavy. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to cry in the darkness, mourning the life she had left behind in a moment of academic curiosity that she could never take back. Chapter 3. Blood Remembers. What Mind Forgets. The council chamber had changed in the 3 days since Harper arrived. Where once it had been a place of purely military strategy and territorial disputes, it now held an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with external threats. Harper sat beside Magnus at the long oak table, maps of defensive fortifications spread before her, and every eye in the room was fixed on her with varying degrees of hostility or curiosity. Magnus had requested her presence without explanation. Harper had arrived expecting imprisonment or interrogation, and instead found herself being asked to review the castle's current defensive structure. Beatrice's jaw had tightened perceptibly when Harper began to speak, her voice steady as she pointed out vulnerabilities that centuries of military tradition had somehow overlooked. "The eastern tower placement creates a blind spot along the perimeter," Harper had said, her finger tracing the layout on parchment that she had never seen before this moment, but understood with absolute clarity. "If an enemy force approached from the riverside, they could advance nearly 100 meters before your sentries would have visual confirmation. You need either a secondary watchtower or a repositioning of the existing garrison." One of the older council's members, a weathered alpha named Garrett, who had been advising Magnus since before his father's death, leaned forward with interest. "The girl speaks truth. I have always found that approach unsettling, though I could never articulate why. Because your instincts recognized the problem even if your mind had not mapped it," Harper said carefully. She was speaking to military men in a language they understood, translating her academic knowledge of medieval fortifications into the practical concerns of defense and survival. Architectural vulnerability is also tactical vulnerability. Your castle is sound, but sound is not optimal. Through that first day and the next, Harper had offered suggestions that came from a combination of her scholarly knowledge and something else. Something that was beginning to emerge from within her body with increasing insistence. She found herself understanding defensive strategies intuitively, sensing weak points in construction with a clarity that bordered on preternatural. When she suggested repositioning of guards, she could feel the correctness of it through something deeper than logic. By the third day, she was manifesting symptoms that terrified her. Her hearing had become impossibly acute. In the council chamber, she could hear conversations happening in adjoining rooms with perfect clarity, as if people were speaking directly beside her rather than behind thick stone walls. Her sense of smell had intensified to the point where she could distinguish individual scents in a crowded room: the metallic tang of armor oil, the herbal notes of Beatrice's soap, the distinctive musk and smoke scent that belonged to Magnus alone. She could feel the emotional states of the people around her like a pressure against her skin. When Garrett was pleased with her suggestion, she felt a warm satisfaction bloom in her chest. When Beatrice watched her with suspicion, Harper felt the cold edge of distrust like a blade against her consciousness. It was disorienting and overwhelming and completely impossible according to every framework of biology that Harper understood. That evening, she found Beatrice waiting in the corridor outside the council chamber, her scarred face unreadable. "Come with me," the beta said. It was not a request. Harper followed Beatrice to a private chamber where Father Oswald was already waiting, several of his ancient texts spread across a table. The old priest looked up as they entered, and his expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy, or might have been grim confirmation of information he had already compiled. "You are manifesting," Father Oswald said without preamble. "The acceleration suggests that proximity to your mate and immersion in pack dynamics is catalyzing your dormant nature. How many hours of sleep have you managed since arrival?" 4. Maybe 5 total, Harper admitted. Her body felt like it was vibrating at a frequency that made rest impossible. "My senses are changing. I can hear things I shouldn't be able to hear. I can feel things. Your bloodline is waking," Father Oswald said. He opened one of the texts, revealing pages of meticulous handwriting dating back decades. Time walkers carry dormant shifter blood that requires specific conditions to manifest. Proximity to their true mate, exposure to pack energies, the natural cycles of the moon. All of these trigger activation. You were always going to transform, but the process has been accelerated. Beatrice was watching Harper with new calculation in her eyes. How long until full manifestation? Days. Perhaps a week, Father Oswald said. Once she fully shifts to wolf form, the transformation becomes irreversible. Her body will be permanently anchored to this age and timeline. She will not be able to return to her origin time. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Harper felt her knees weaken, and she sat down hard on the nearest chair. "You're saying I have to choose. Within days I have to decide if I'm staying or leaving, because after that, the choice is made for me." "There is a way," Father Oswald said carefully. He pulled a different text toward him. This one ancient and fragile, the parchment nearly translucent with age. "The ritual that brought you here has a reverse sequence, but it can only be performed during the next adequate lunar peak. The lunar cycles required for temporal displacement occur only during specific celestial alignments. The next window will be in 2 months. 2 months? Harper's voice sounded hollow. "That is more than enough time for me to complete the manifestation. Unless you leave before it finishes," Beatrice pointed out. Her tone was matter of fact, almost clinical in its assessment. "If you perform the reversal ritual before your wolf form fully awakens, you might be able to return to your time. You would carry some shifter genetics, but they would remain dormant. You could live as human again, at least partially." The temptation of it was staggering. To go back. To return to her career and her empty apartment and her life of solitary achievement. But even as the thought formed, Harper felt something inside her rebel against it. The part of her that was manifesting, the part that carried bloodline magic older than recorded history, screamed that returning would be amputation. It would be abandoning something essential. "I need to think," Harper said quietly. She left the chamber without waiting for dismissal. moving through the castle corridors with new understanding of the space. She could feel the stone beneath her feet, the weight of history pressing down from the walls. She could sense the presence of shifters in various rooms, their unique energy signatures like individual flavors in the air. She found herself in the forest adjacent to the castle, moving between ancient oaks without fully understanding how she had gotten there. The vegetation was dense and primordial, untouched by centuries of clearing and cultivation. The air smelled of earth and growing things, and something wild that made her heart race. Magnus found her sitting beneath an enormous oak, her back against the trunk, her hands shaking. "Beatrice told me you know," Harper said without looking up. "I would have explained myself," Magnus said quietly. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "The bond should have given you some warning. Mates are connected. You should have sensed my nature. Your nature is not the problem," Harper said. "My nature is the problem. I did not choose to have magic in my bloodline. I did not choose to have dormant shifter genetics waiting to wake up at the most inconvenient possible moment. I chose education and research, and a life where I could understand the world through logic and evidence. And now?" Magnus asked. "Now the world is operating according to rules I never learned," Harper continued. Her voice cracked slightly. "I have 2 months to decide if I want to go back to a life that was hollow and isolated, or stay in a world that terrifies me and accept a destiny I never consented to. And my body is making the decision for me whether I like it or not." She felt tears beginning to fall, hot and bitter against her cheeks. She had been holding them back for 3 days, maintaining composure, trying to maintain the fiction that she was managing the situation with academic detachment. Now the dam broke. "I buried my grandmother 3 years ago," Harper whispered. "She tried to tell me. She tried to explain that our family carried something old and important, and that one day I might need to understand what I was, and I dismissed her. I told her it was superstition. I told her I was a scientist and did not believe in magic or bloodline destiny or any of the things she valued. And now she is dead, and I am here, and I will never get to tell her that she was right." Magnus did something then that Harper did not expect. He simply held her. His arms came around her, drawing her against his chest, his heartbeat steady and grounding against her ear. He did not try to offer platitudes or false reassurance. He simply allowed her to break completely, all of her carefully constructed rationality crumbling in the face of grief and fear and overwhelming transformation. After a long time, when her tears had subsided, Magnus spoke quietly. "My first mate died 8 years ago. She was pregnant with our first child when a hunting accident claimed her life. I was not there. I was away on diplomatic business, building alliances with neighboring packs, trying to be the kind of leader my father never was. When I returned, she was gone, and with her, our child, our future." Harper looked up at him, seeing for the first time the depth of sorrow that existed beneath his controlled exterior. "For 8 years I convinced myself that I did not deserve another mate," Magnus continued. "That the moon goddess had made a mistake when my father's bloodline was blessed with the ability to survive and lead. I told the council I would rule without a Luna, that I did not need the bond to be effective. But the truth is that I was afraid of losing someone again, afraid of being vulnerable to that kind of devastation." He paused, his amber eyes fixed on her face with absolute intensity. "And then you appeared in my hall, wearing clothes from another age, carrying objects that defy explanation, and my wolf knew with perfect certainty that the moon goddess had sent me a second chance, not to replace what I lost, but to prove that I was worthy of love despite my failures." "Magnus," Harper began, but he cut her off gently. "You do not have to feel what I feel," he said. "The bond exists whether you acknowledge it or not. But know that whatever you choose, I will honor it. If you wish to return to your time, I will help you perform the ritual. If you wish to stay, I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that you never regret the choice." He let her go, giving her space to breathe and process. Harper sat in silence beneath the ancient oak, feeling the pulse of magic through the earth and through her own transforming body. She still did not know what she wanted, but she knew with sudden clarity that the decision had to be hers, that no one could force her toward either future. They returned to the castle as darkness was falling, moving through corridors lit by torch and candle. Harper was mentally preparing herself for another night of minimal sleep, another night of fighting the changes happening in her body. Instead, they found the great hall in chaos. A messenger had arrived bearing a sealed letter from Conrad Ironjaw, Alpha of the neighboring territory. The message was simple and direct. Surrender the foreigner woman for trial, or war would come to the Greyfang lands. Conrad claimed that Harper was a witch and a threat to all shifter kind. He demanded that Magnus submit to the council's judgment on the matter or face military consequences. The council was already gathering, tempers flaring, some voices arguing for capitulation, others demanding defense. Beatrice was barking orders to the guard captains. Father Oswald was reviewing old alliances and territorial claims. And Magnus was standing in the center of the storm, his expression carved from stone. When he saw Harper in the doorway, his entire demeanor shifted. He crossed the room, took her hand, and positioned her beside him on the raised platform where the Alpha held court. "Let it be known," Magnus announced, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, "that Harper Montgomery is under my protection. She is not a witch. She is my mate, chosen by the moon goddess herself. And any who wish to challenge that choice will answer to me personally." The statement hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then Lady Vivian stepped forward from the shadows of the hall, her expression suffused with carefully controlled rage. Her voice, when she spoke, was venomous and deliberate. "The Alpha claims his mate publicly?" Vivian said, her tone suggesting this was news to her despite the obvious lie. "How interesting. The council has been wondering about the disposition of the northern heir, and now the king reveals his choice. Not a noble bloodline, not a politically advantageous match, but a stranger from an impossible time, carrying the mark of magic that we do not understand." The whispers that followed were immediate and vicious. By nightfall, half the castle believed Harper was a witch. By the next morning, the belief had metastasized into something far more dangerous, a narrative of manipulation and dark intent that painted Harper as a threat to everything the kingdom had built. Vivian's campaign of subtle sabotage had begun, and Harper found herself isolated within the very castle that had welcomed her just days before. Only Griffin and Father Oswald seemed immune to the spreading suspicion. Beatrice had retreated into strategic silence, waiting to see how the political crisis would resolve itself. And Harper, feeling her body shifting and changing with increasing intensity, realized that she had run out of time to make a decision. Events were now making the decision for her, one way or another. Chapter 4. When Wolves Challenge Fate. The declaration of challenge hung in the great hall like a blade suspended above water. Magnus would face Conrad in single combat, the ancient ritual that settled territorial disputes without mass bloodshed. The council assembled to witness the pronouncement, and within hours, messengers were dispatched across the northern territories. By dawn, word had spread to every pack within 100 miles. The Alpha King would meet the rival Alpha in formal combat. Those who wished to witness the spectacle were invited to attend. 3 weeks of preparation followed, and Harper found herself watching Magnus transform during training sessions. He moved through combat drills with lethal precision, his body a weapon honed through years of discipline and warfare. His sparring partners were skilled warriors, and yet Magnus defeated each one with economical brutality. No wasted movement, no unnecessary flourish, just absolute effectiveness. Griffin began joining her during these sessions, sensing that her presence seemed to center Magnus in ways that nothing else could. The bond between them was growing stronger, Harper realized. She could feel the pull of it more intensely with each passing day. When Magnus was near, her newly manifesting senses aligned with his presence like a compass finding north. When he was distant, she felt slightly unmoored, as though part of her essence was elsewhere. The manifestation is accelerating because of the bond proximity, Father Oswald had explained during one of their increasingly frequent consultations. Your Omega nature recognizes its alpha mate. It is drawing you toward completion faster than normal timelines would suggest. The implication was clear. Harper's window of choice was closing more rapidly than anticipated. One evening, 3 days before the scheduled combat, Magnus found her in the castle gardens. The winter air was sharp enough to bite, but Harper had stopped feeling cold in the conventional sense. Her body temperature had elevated as her omega nature awakened, and the chill merely sharpened her senses rather than creating discomfort. "I wanted you to see this," Magnus said quietly. He held out his hand, waiting for her to take it. When she did, the contact sent electricity through both of them. The mate bond sang with intensity that made Harper's breath catch. They walked through corridors Harper had memorized, then down stairs that led to a training chamber beneath the castle. Magnus dismissed the guards with a gesture. Inside, he began to spar with her, teaching her defensive movements adapted for her still human frame. His touch was careful but firm, guiding her body into positions that would maximize her protection if violence came. "When you fully manifest, you will be faster," he said, correcting her stance. "Stronger. Your wolf form will give you capabilities your human body cannot achieve. But until then, you must learn to use leverage and positioning." Harper moved through the drills, aware that each repetition was burning the knowledge into muscle memory. More than that, she was aware of Magnus watching her with an intensity that had nothing to do with combat instruction. "Stop," he said finally. "I cannot teach while you stand so close to me and retain any semblance of focus." Harper smiled despite herself. "Then perhaps teaching is not what you actually wanted to accomplish." Magnus's laugh was low and rough. He crossed the distance between them in a single stride, his hand coming up to cradle her face with unexpected gentleness. "No, teaching was merely an excuse to be alone with you. Everything I do lately seems to require some form of deception to ensure we have time together without hostile eyes observing." He kissed her then, and the mate bond erupted between them in a cascade of connection so intense that Harper lost all sense of where her body ended and his began. This was not the hesitant first kiss of the forest. This was claiming. This was a promise made physical. His hands pulled her closer, and Harper found herself responding with desperation that matched his own. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Harper rested her forehead against his chest. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "Catastrophic," Magnus agreed. His arms remained around her, holding her as though she might disappear if he released her. "Potentially disastrous for both of us." "I am still trapped between two times," Harper continued. "I still do not know if I am staying or returning. This, what we are doing, it will only make the eventual choice more painful." "I know," Magnus said quietly, "but I cannot stop. I do not wish to stop. Even knowing the pain that may come, even understanding the stakes, I would choose this again. I would choose you again." Harper pulled back to look at him, seeing the honesty in his amber eyes. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she stayed, where she became fully shifter and claimed her place as Luna beside him, where her bloodline magic fully awakened, and she belonged to this world as completely as she had never belonged to her academic one. The vision was seductive and terrifying in equal measure. The day of combat arrived cold and clear. The arena had been prepared in a vast clearing outside the castle, surrounded by hundreds of shifters from multiple packs. They formed concentric circles, their presence creating an almost palpable energy of anticipation. This was not mere combat. This was alpha challenge. The ancient way shifters settled disputes that threatened pack stability. Conrad arrived with his personal guard, a massive wolf even in human form, his body covered in scars that spoke of decades spent fighting. His eyes held the cunning of someone who had survived by any means necessary. Magnus stripped his clothing and began the shift, his transformation fluid and complete. Within seconds, a massive silver-gray wolf stood where the man had been, his body easily matching Conrad's in size, but superior in muscle definition and tactical positioning. The crowd fell silent. This was spectacle at its most primal. The combat was brutal. Both wolves moved with terrifying speed, teeth seeking vulnerable flesh, bodies colliding with force that left visible impacts on the earth. Blood was drawn. Roars echoed across the clearing. For the first hour, neither wolf gained clear advantage. Harper stood beside Beatrice, feeling the combat through every cell of her body. The mate bond connected her to Magnus, and she could sense his weariness, his pain, his absolute determination to defeat the threat. She could feel his wolf pushing harder, drawing on reserves of strength that should have been depleted. As the second hour wore on, Magnus was winning. Conrad was bleeding more heavily, moving with visible exhaustion. But then Magnus made a tactical error, an opening that Conrad exploited ruthlessly. His massive jaws closed around Magnus's neck, and for a moment, Harper thought she was about to watch her mate die. Something inside her broke completely. The power that erupted from Harper's body was not a scream. It was a command at the most fundamental level of existence. Every shifter in the arena, including both combatants, froze mid-action. The command was wordless but absolute. Stop. All 300 shifters present found themselves unable to move, held by an Omega's will so pure and overwhelming that resistance was impossible. Conrad's jaws released Magnus's throat. Magnus's body stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause in respect for the power being manifested. Father Oswald looked at Harper with shocked realization. This was not normal Omega manifestation. This was Time Walker power fully awakening. The genetic magic of bloodlines that could traverse centuries now directed with perfect control. Harper took a step forward, and without conscious thought, she continued. The command clarified. Submit or die. Conrad, still locked in wolf form, felt the weight of that ultimatum. He released Magnus completely and fell to the ground in submission, his entire body trembling beneath the force of the Omega command. Magnus transformed back to human form, blood streaming from the wound at his throat. He crossed the arena directly to Harper and pulled her against him, uncaring of his nudity or the hundreds of witnesses watching. Mine, he announced to the assembled packs, his voice carrying alpha authority that resonated through the mate bond. Chosen by the moon goddess, recognized by all present as Luna of the Northern Territories. He marked her then, his teeth finding the juncture of neck and shoulder, claiming her in the most public way possible. The gesture was possessive and absolute. The pack erupted in celebration, the moment of tension breaking into wild cheers. But Harper felt the moment of manifestation shift inside her, something finalizing. The full awakening of her Omega nature was nearly complete. She had days left, perhaps a week, before the transformation became irreversible, and the choice she had been postponing had just been made for her by her own blood and power. She met Beatrice's eyes across the clearing and saw something unexpected there. Not hostility anymore, but grudging respect. Vivian watched from the shadows at the edge of the crowd, her perfect facade cracking as she witnessed Magnus claim Harper publicly, witnessed the assembled packs accept this stranger as Luna. The betrayal burned like fire, and in that moment, a plan began to form. If she could not have Magnus, then no one would. Chapter 5. The Hour When Destiny Breaks. Father Oswald's library was colder than Harper remembered, the air thick with the weight of ancient knowledge that predated kingdoms. The old priest stood before her with texts spread across every available surface, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he revealed information that changed everything. Time Walkers, he began, his voice reverent and grave. Your bloodline carries the rarest gift. Not merely shifters, but those capable of traversing the boundaries between ages. The lore suggests only 1 in 100 million births produces a Time Walker. Your arrival was not random accident. It was predestined convergence. Harper moved closer to the texts, her historian's mind demanding documentation and proof. How do you know this with certainty? Because these texts describe your manifestation exactly, Father Oswald said. He pointed to passages written in medieval script, accounts from monks who had documented travelers appearing throughout history. Acute sensory enhancement, emotional sensitivity to pack dynamics, rapid shift toward wolf form, all markers of Time Walker awakening. And the reversal ritual? Harper asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. The ritual that brought you here requires replication during the next lunar peak, Father Oswald explained. That window occurs in 2 months. But Harper, you must understand the cost. Every day your manifestation progresses brings you closer to permanent anchoring to this timeline. If your wolf form fully awakens before the lunar window closes, you cannot return. The magic will not permit it. You will be bound to this age forever. Harper felt the weight of that statement settle into her bones. How long until full manifestation? 2 weeks, perhaps less, Father Oswald said carefully. But there is more. When extreme danger or survival instinct activates, the process accelerates dramatically. Your command during the combat was evidence of that acceleration. Situations involving your mate's safety can expedite the transformation significantly. The implications were staggering. Harper had thought she had weeks to decide. Instead, she had days. Griffin appeared in the library's doorway that evening, his expression grim. "They found him," the Gamma said without preamble. "Conrad has been keeping warriors at the castle's borders for days, hidden camps we did not detect until now. He has also been making contact with sympathizers inside these walls." "Who?" Magnus demanded, entering behind Griffin with predatory grace. "Lady Vivian," Griffin said carefully. "She was spotted meeting with Conrad's messenger 3 days ago. Our scouts intercepted communications indicating conspiracy. They plan something during the lunar feast tomorrow night." Magnus's jaw clenched with barely contained rage. "Arrest her." "We have no proof," Griffin said. "Only suspicious meetings and intercepted messages that could be interpreted multiple ways. The council would demand more evidence before we could act without appearing tyrannical." Beatrice entered the chamber, her scarred face confirming that she had already heard the news. "Vivian seeks to destroy the bond between you and Harper. If the mate connection were severed before full manifestation, Harper would be cast adrift. Time walkers separated from their true mates during early transformation often cannot stabilize. She could be destroyed by the competing forces within her own blood." Harper stood slowly, understanding the calculations being made around her. She was a problem to be solved, a vulnerability to be exploited. "I should leave, tonight, before any of this escalates further." "No," Magnus said with absolute finality. His voice carried command that left no room for argument. "You will remain under my protection. I am putting you all in danger," Harper said, her voice rising slightly. "Vivian is right that I am a threat. I carry power I do not understand. I am a woman displaced from her time, causing political upheaval, destabilizing alliances that took decades to build." "You are my mate," Magnus replied. "And the only thing I regret is that I did not claim you fully before this conspiracy had time to form." The lunar feast was held in the Great Hall. Hundreds of shifters gathered to celebrate the full moon and the approaching winter solstice. Harper wore formal dress that marked her status as Alpha King's mate, but the garments felt like armor rather than clothing. Every eye in the room carried suspicion or calculation. Even the celebration felt staged, like a performance everyone understood was temporary. Vivian appeared near midnight, her presence announced by a shift in the room's energy. She moved through the crowd with calculated grace, her smile fixed and poisonous. When she approached the elevated table where Magnus and Harper sat, her movements were serpentine. "A toast," Vivian announced, raising her glass so that everyone in the hall could hear. "To the Alpha King and his newfound mate." How quickly destiny moves when magic is involved. Something in her tone made Harper's skin prickle with warning. Before she could react, Vivian threw the contents of her drink into Harper's face. The liquid burned like fire, and Harper felt it absorb through her skin with terrifying intensity. Her body seized, every nerve igniting with agony. Magnus moved with predatory grace, his hand reaching for Vivian, but she was already backing away toward the main doors. Behind her, hidden figures emerged from the shadows of the Great Hall. Not Conrad's warriors, hired rogues, mercenaries, their identities concealed. The chaos that erupted was immediate. Magnus shifted, his wolf form massive and lethal. But the rogues were trained for supernatural combat. Beatrice transformed beside him, her warrior form complementing his. Griffin was suddenly there as well, a third wolf defending the hall against the assault. Harper tried to move, but her body would not obey. The poison was doing something to her blood, accelerating something. She could feel her manifestation spiraling out of control. The transformation that should have taken days compressing into seconds. Her skin was burning from the inside. Her bones felt like they were reforming. Father Oswald was suddenly beside her, speaking urgently. The poison was designed to force your complete transformation. Vivian wanted to either kill you or force you to shift before your mate could protect you. Hold on, Harper. Hold on to conscious choice. Do not let panic complete what the poison started. Harper fought against the change, every cell of her body screaming to become wolf, to let the animal instinct take over. She could see Magnus fighting the rogues, his focus split between defending the hall and checking on her. That divided attention nearly cost him. One of the hired fighters managed to rake claws across his shoulder, drawing blood. The mate bond erupted. Harper felt Magnus's pain as though it were her own. Something inside her broke open completely. The transformation that she had been fighting, resisting, delaying, became suddenly necessary. Not because she wanted it, but because her mate was hurt, and only her full power would allow her to help him. The shift happened in seconds rather than the gradual process it should have been. Harper's body twisted, reformed, became something both human and wolf simultaneously, before settling into full lupine form. Her coat was white and silver, her eyes glowing the same green that had marked her human face. The effect on the attackers was immediate. They staggered backward, sensing the power that had just manifested. An Omega in full transformation was dangerous enough, but Harper was a Time Walker Omega, her bloodline magic ancient and overwhelming. She moved with lethal grace, and the rogues fell before her. Not killed, she maintained enough conscious control to stop short of murder, but thoroughly neutralized. Within minutes, the hall was cleared of external threats. Vivian was captured trying to escape through a servant's passage. Her plans crumbled, her conspiracy exposed. She fought against her captors with wild desperation, but her strength was nothing compared to fully manifested shifters. Harper transformed back to human form. Magnus's coat wrapped around her shoulders, her body shaking from the trauma of forced manifestation. She looked at Magnus with sudden, devastating understanding. "I cannot reverse the ritual now," she said quietly. "My transformation is complete. I cannot reverse the ritual on my own," she said quietly. "My transformation is complete. The door to my time is closed to a lone traveler. I am anchored here, unless the mate bond is fully sealed and both of us cross together. I am anchored here permanently." "I know," Magnus said. He pulled her close, his hand gentle against her still shaking frame. "I am sorry you did not have the choice." "I made it, though," Harper whispered. "When you were hurt, I chose you. I chose to stay. And now that choice is permanent." Griffin appeared with news that made the situation even more complex. "We recovered communications showing that Vivian acted independently. Conrad distanced himself days ago when he realized the conspiracy was becoming unstable. He has already sent formal apologies and denials through official channels. The political damage was contained, but the personal cost for Harper was absolute. She had lost her time, her world, her academic career. She had lost everything except Magnus, and in the moment of losing it all, she realized that was the only thing that truly mattered. Vivienne was confined to the dungeons pending judgment. She had attempted murder of the Luna and conspired with external forces against the Alpha King. By shifter law, the sentence would be severe, but that trial belonged to the future. For now, Harper had to come to terms with the woman she had become. Chapter 6. Between Two Worlds. The descent through time was agony made manifest. Harper and Magnus fell through a void that existed nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Their bodies stretched across centuries, their consciousness fragmenting across timelines. It was drowning without water, burning without flame, being unmade and remade in the space between heartbeats. Harper could feel the mate bond singing between them, the only constant thread in an infinity of dissolution. When they emerged, it was into silence and cold. They landed in the crypts of Castle Greyfang, but these crypts bore no resemblance to the ones Magnus knew. The torches were gone. The symbols had faded to barely visible scratches on ancient stone. The very air carried a quality of abandonment that spoke of centuries passing in the space of moments. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, illuminating dust and decay. Magnus transformed back to human form, his body immediately registering the shock of the transition. He was bleeding from the combat wound at his throat, and the cold air of this strange time made every injury sing with fresh pain. Harper lay beside him, her body still partially caught between forms, her breathing shallow and labored. "Where are we?" Magnus asked, though Harper could hear the answer already forming in his mind through the bond. The architecture was the same, but deteriorated beyond recognition. The fortress he had known was now only ruins. 2025, Harper whispered. "My time. 800 years in your future." They emerged from the crypts into a night unlike anything Magnus had ever experienced. The sky above the castle was illuminated not by stars, but by artificial light bleeding from a distant city. Structures of glass and metal rose impossibly high in that direction, their shapes belonging to no architectural tradition he could identify. And the sounds, the low constant hum of machinery, the distant roar of something moving rapidly, the electric buzz of technology that predated any medieval understanding of physics. Magnus reacted with the controlled assessment of a warrior evaluating a battlefield. His body tensed. His senses expanded, trying to categorize threats and understand the environment. But even an Alpha King's capabilities were insufficient for processing this scale of strangeness. Harper led him to her apartment in London through means of transport that nearly drove Magnus to transformation. The underground railway system, the press of hundreds of humans packed into metal containers moving at impossible speed, the fluorescent lights that burned without flame. All of it registered as profound wrongness in his primal mind, but he held to human form through sheer determination and the grounding presence of the mate bond. Her apartment was small, modern, utterly devoid of the grandeur he associated with human nobility. But it was warm, and the door locked against the outside world, and that was sufficient for the moment. Magnus moved through the space like a wolf entering unfamiliar territory, examining everything with careful precision. The electric lights made him flinch initially. The television screen sent him into predatory stance. The bathroom fixtures confused him until Harper demonstrated their function with patient explanation. And the bed, modern, soft, bearing the scent of Harper from years of use, represented the only element of this alien world that felt even remotely comprehensible. "I need you to understand something," Harper said, as evening fell into night in this strange time. They sat on her small sofa. Magnus's shoulder wound finally cleaned and bandaged with supplies that seemed miraculous compared to medieval medicine. "My world operates by completely different rules than yours. There is no magic here. No shifters. No supernatural elements at all, or at least none that are publicly acknowledged." "Then how do humans survive?" Magnus asked, genuinely curious rather than critical. "Technology," Harper said. "Science. Understanding of how the physical world works. We have lost something your people retained. The connection to the supernatural, to instinct, to magic itself. But we have gained something in return. We understand medicine, physics. We have conquered disease and distance and hunger through rational thought and invention." "At what cost?" Magnus asked. Harper did not answer immediately. She walked to her window and looked out at the distant lights of the city. Loneliness, disconnection, the feeling that we are all drifting through existence without purpose or true belonging. "I spent my entire adult life pursuing academic achievement and credentials and recognition. And I was miserable. I was completely, utterly alone." Magnus stood and crossed to her, pulling her back against his chest. The mate bond hummed between them, a constant reminder of connection that transcended the boundaries of time and reality. "You are not alone now." "No," Harper said quietly, "but I cannot stay here. And I cannot go back to your time unless we find a way." Over the following days, Harper researched frantically, accessing her university's database of historical texts and academic papers. Father Oswald's texts had referenced multiple variants of the temporal ritual, and buried in digitized medieval manuscripts, Harper found references to the reversal sequence. The ritual required specific conditions: a mate bond fully established through physical consummation, both participants willing to traverse temporal boundaries, and a lunar alignment matching the original convergence. "The next adequate lunar peak is 6 weeks away," Harper explained to Magnus, showing him the astronomical calculations on her laptop. The technology confused him, but the information was clear enough. "We have time. If we want to go back together, We need to complete the mate bond fully. Not just acknowledge it. Actually consummate it. Complete the magical binding. These pathways are not doors. They're ice on spring water, Harper said, flipping through Oswald's scans. They look solid until they're not. Magnus understood the meaning, if not the science. Waiting 6 full weeks was a plan that might end with no path at all. Magnus's amber eyes fixed on her with absolute intensity. Is that what you wish? I don't know, Harper said with brutal honesty. I came to your time completely against my will. I lost my career, my world, my entire life. And then I fell in love with you, and I manifested as a shifter, and Vivian poisoned me into transformation, and I had to choose between 2 impossible futures. And now? Magnus asked. Now I am standing in my apartment in 2025, looking at the man from 800 years in the past who claimed to be my mate before I believed in destiny or magic or anything beyond what I could prove scientifically, Harper said. She stepped closer to him. And I want to go back. I want to stay with you. I want to accept what the moon goddess chose for us. The completion of the mate bond happened that night, in Harper's small bed in a London apartment, with the sounds of 21st century traffic filtered through modern windows. It was nothing like medieval ceremony or ritual. It was intimate and private and absolute. The completion of the mate bond happened that night. It was intimate and private and absolute. The mark he had already given her flared white-hot beneath his teeth's remembered claim, and the bond fused into something unbreakable. Harper felt the change at the deepest level of her being, her connection to her original time severing entirely, her anchor shifting permanently to Magnus and to the medieval age. For 2 weeks, they waited. Magnus adapted gradually to the modern world, his shock giving way to fascination. Harper showed him how electricity worked, how vehicles functioned, how humans accessed knowledge through computers. He understood remarkably quickly, his strategic mind grasping concepts with surprising facility. But they both felt the pull of the portal weakening with each passing day. The 6 weeks until the lunar peak began to feel dangerously optimistic. The temporal pathways are degrading, Harper explained, referencing notes she had compiled from Father Oswald's texts. The longer we remain in the wrong time, the harder it becomes to traverse back. We need to attempt the ritual soon, even if the lunar alignment is not perfect. On the night of the full moon, closest to the required celestial configuration, Harper and Magnus returned to the crypts of Castle Greyfang. The ruins seemed almost to recognize them, the ancient stones resonating with the power they carried. Harper had memorized the reversal sequence from Father Oswald's texts, and now she recited it with perfect precision. The portal opened differently this time. Instead of the violent tearing sensation that had pulled Harper forward through time, the return was almost gentle, a gradual shifting of reality, a fading of 21st century details, a growing solidity of medieval stone beneath their feet. They fell through the space between times together, Magnus's hand clasped tightly with Harper's, their mate bond serving as anchor and guide. They emerged in the crypts of Castle Greyfang as it existed in 1237, the fortress whole and functioning, the moment of their departure frozen in the past. When they stumbled up the stone stairs toward the great hall, the pack was waiting. Beatrice stood with guards, her scarred face showing shock and immediate relief. Griffin was beside her, equally astonished, and Father Oswald was positioned near the crypt entrance, as though he had been expecting their return through the intervening seconds. The ritual worked, Father Oswald said simply, understanding passing through his ancient eyes. Magnus pulled Harper close, presenting her to the assembled pack with unmistakable possession and relief. She is fully mine now, fully bonded, fully ours. The mate bond is complete. The pack recognized the truth in his declaration and offered formal acknowledgement, but Harper barely heard it. She was too busy processing the reality that she had sacrificed everything, her time, her career, her entire world, and chosen this instead, the ancient stone beneath her feet, the medieval torches burning with real flame, the smell of wood smoke and animals and Magnus's distinctive scent. She had no regrets. Chapter 7. Where Two Hearts Become One. The days following their return from 2025 blurred together in a haze of adjustment and acceptance. Harper stood in the library of Castle Greyfang, surrounded by texts that Father Oswald had been carefully cataloging for decades, and felt the weight of permanence settle into her bones. She was no longer a visitor to this world. She was no longer displaced. She had crossed back through time with her mate, and now there was only forward. Father Oswald moved through the library with renewed purpose, his ancient hands trembling slightly as he opened volumes he had spent years studying. The reversal ritual had worked, but its success had provided answers to questions that had plagued scholars for centuries. Time walkers were not myth. They were documented. They were real. Your bloodline carries the oldest magic, Father Oswald explained, gesturing to passages written in multiple languages and centuries. These texts reference other time walkers throughout history. Some stayed in the times they arrived. Others returned. But all of them changed the trajectory of their worlds simply by existing within them. Harper absorbed the information with a historian's analytical mind, though it felt surreal to be the subject of historical documentation rather than the researcher analyzing it. She was no longer studying the past from a distance. She was living within it, shaping it, becoming part of its narrative. The formal ceremonies began the day after their return. The council reconvened to address the matter of Harper's status and the implications of her successful traversal through time. Some members remained skeptical, but the evidence was undeniable. Magnus presented Harper to the assembled pack as his fully bonded Luna, and her power as a manifested Omega was demonstration enough of her authenticity. Beatrice came to Harper privately 3 days after the ceremonies concluded. The scarred beta found her in the gardens, where Harper was cataloging the medicinal plants with the focused intensity of someone trying to understand her new world through familiar academic frameworks. The warrior woman sat down beside her without preamble. "I owe you acknowledgement," Beatrice said carefully. "I was wrong to doubt you. Your power during the attack, your willingness to sacrifice yourself for Magnus. Those are markers of genuine Luna nature. The pack respects strength, and you have proven yourself stronger than most." Harper accepted the concession with grace. "I am still learning what it means to be Luna. My instincts guide me more than knowledge, but I am committed to serving this pack and protecting Magnus. That is all anyone can do," Beatrice replied. She stood to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, the resistance you face from some courtiers will fade. They simply needed to see proof that you were not a threat to our stability. Now that you are manifested and bonded, you are secure in your position." Griffin appeared in Harper's chamber the following evening, his shoulder still bound but healing steadily. The injury from the feast night skirmish had been severe, but shifter biology accelerated recovery in ways that medieval medicine could never achieve. He carried a small gift, a bound journal made from leather and parchment, clearly commissioned from the castle craftspeople. "For your documentation," Griffin said, his young face eager. "Father Oswald mentioned that you wished to record your experiences as a time walker. This seemed appropriate. Historians of the future may wish to know what you witnessed." Harper accepted the journal with genuine gratitude. It represented not just a practical tool, but acknowledgement from the pack that her perspective had value. She began writing that night, documenting everything from her arrival in medieval England to her return with Magnus. She wrote about the technological world she had left behind, about the loneliness that had defined her academic career, about the moment she realized that belonging mattered more than achievement. Magnus found her at dawn, exhausted from writing but determined to capture every detail before memory distorted the truth. He sat beside her and read passages aloud, asking questions, listening with the focused attention that marked him as a true leader. When he reached the section where Harper described his first mate and the child they had lost, he took her hand gently. "I should have told you about her," he said quietly, "about Elena and our daughter. I was ashamed that I could not protect them, that my failure in that moment defined so much of my subsequent years. You told me in the forest when we both needed to be vulnerable," Harper said, "and I understood then that your fear came from love. Elena was fortunate to have been yours, even briefly, and now I have been given a second chance," Magnus said. He pulled Harper close. and the mate bond hummed between them with perfect contentment. The moon goddess does not make mistakes. The council began requesting Harper's input on matters of strategy and governance. Her knowledge of historical conflicts, combined with her newly manifested Omega intuition about pack dynamics, proved surprisingly valuable. She suggested modifications to trade routes based on historical knowledge of later bandit activity. She identified vulnerable points in alliances through her understanding of political evolution. She offered perspectives that centuries of medieval tradition had simply accepted. Initial resistance from conservative council members gradually diminished as Harper consistently provided strategic value. Some courtiers, particularly the older alphas who held traditional views, continued to regard her with suspicion, but the younger generation of shifters, particularly younger females, began to see her as a model of strength and transformation. The conspiracy regarding Vivian was brought to formal trial before the assembled council and pack representatives. The young woman was contained in secure chambers, her Omega power suppressed through magical restraints. When called before judgment, she maintained a facade of defiance even as evidence of her crimes accumulated. Vivian had acted independently, it became clear, but her actions had violated fundamental pack law. The attempted murder of the Luna was the highest crime a pack member could commit. The conspiracy with external forces multiplied the severity. The council deliberated for 3 days before rendering judgment. Vivienne was declared exiled from all northern territories. She would be stripped of pack affiliation and cast out with nothing. It was a sentence that, for a shifter, amounted to slow death. Without pack protection, without community, survival in the medieval world was nearly impossible. Harper felt unexpected compassion for the young woman who had tried to destroy her. Vivian's crime had stemmed from desperate ambition and wounded pride, not from evil nature. But pack law existed for reasons, and exceptions could not be made without creating chaos. 3 weeks after their return, Magnus held a formal ceremony to present Harper to the neighboring packs and secure their acknowledgement of her position as Luna. Delegations arrived from territories across the northern territories, and Harper found herself seated beside Magnus in formal feast, receiving the formal bows of other alphas and Lunas. It was during this feast that Harper felt a strange stirring in her body. Her senses had been heightened since manifestation. But this was different. This was a recognition at the deepest biological level. She was pregnant. The realization hit her with stunning clarity through the mate bond, and Magnus understood the moment she did. His amber eyes blazed with emotion, joy, wonder, protectiveness, all at once. But publicly, he simply squeezed her hand gently and continued with the formal proceedings, as though nothing had fundamentally changed. When they retired to their chambers that night, Magnus pulled Harper close and rested his hand on her still flat belly with reverent care. "Our child," he whispered. "The heir to the northern territories. A child born of a time walker and an alpha king. A child born of impossible circumstances." Harper corrected gently. She covered his hand with her own. Born of a future that no longer exists, and a past that could not have predicted this moment. Born of a love that transcended time itself. Later, as Magnus slept beside her, Harper lay awake and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to this world against her will, displaced and terrified. She had lost her time, her career, her entire life as she understood it. But she had gained something infinitely more valuable. A purpose, a belonging, a place in the world where her existence mattered not because of her achievements, but because she was fundamentally loved. The child growing within her would be born into a world of magic and medieval politics, and pack dynamics that would have seemed impossible to the historian Harper had been in 2025. But this child would also be born into a family that understood both worlds, that carried both the technology of the future and the primal strength of the ancient past within their blood. She traced her fingers across the mate mark on her neck, the physical evidence of her bond with Magnus, and finally allowed herself to rest. Chapter 8. Where Home is Found. 5 years had transformed Castle Greyfang into something Magnus could scarcely have imagined during the dark years following his first mate's death. The territories under his rule had expanded not through conquest, but through carefully negotiated alliances. many of which Harper had orchestrated with her combination of historical knowledge and Omega intuition. The castle thrived, the surrounding villages prospered, and the pack that had once been fractured by political intrigue and doubt had solidified into something genuinely unified. Harper moved through the council chamber with measured grace, her swollen belly preceding her by several months. She was carrying twins, Father Oswald had confirmed months earlier, and her body had adapted to the pregnancy with the resilience of shifter genetics. The latest council session concerned trade routes and territorial boundaries with neighboring packs, matters that required strategic thinking Harper had come to excel at. "The Eastern Corridor has been unstable for 3 seasons," she said to the assembled council members. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her position through demonstrated competence rather than through title alone. "We need to establish a neutral trading post where commerce can occur without pack territory being violated. I propose we offer to construct the post and staff it with representatives from all involved packs." Garrett, the weathered alpha who had first recognized Harper's defensive genius, nodded slowly. "The girl speaks wisdom. Such a post would prevent conflicts before they begin. It would also require less military presence in that region," added another council member, a younger alpha named Edmund, who had been skeptical of Harper initially, but had gradually come to respect her contributions. Resources could be redirected to more critical defensive positions. Harper caught the shift in dynamic, resistance crumbling into consideration, crumbling into acceptance. She had learned to read these patterns, to understand when to push forward, and when to allow others to claim ownership of ideas. True leadership was not about being right. It was about making others feel invested in decisions. The session concluded with her proposal, accepted and designated for implementation. As Harper rose to leave, her back ached from the weight she carried. Magnus appeared in the doorway as though summoned by the mate bond itself, his amber eyes assessing her condition with the protective intensity that had intensified significantly since she conceived. "You should rest," Magnus said without preamble, dismissing the council members with a gesture that no one questioned. "I have been resting for months," Harper replied, though she allowed him to support her weight as they moved through the castle corridors. "If I remain sedentary much longer, I will forget how to walk." Magnus's laugh was warm and genuine, a sound that had become increasingly common over the years. He had learned to find joy in moments beyond duty and strategy. This was largely Harper's influence. Her insistence that leadership required balance, that power maintained through perpetual grimness was power built on fragile foundation. They reached their private chambers as afternoon light streamed through the windows. Magnus helped Harper settle onto cushions arranged before the fireplace, then knelt to remove her shoes and massage her feet with surprising gentleness. The mate bond hummed between them, a constant presence that had become as natural as breathing. "Do you regret it?" Magnus asked quietly. "Leaving your time, your world, your entire future as you understood it?" Harper had asked herself this question countless times over the past 5 years. The answer had shifted as her circumstances changed and her understanding deepened. But now, with their children about to be born, with roots stretching deep into this medieval world that had once terrified her, the answer was absolute. "I regret nothing," Harper said. She placed her hand over his, guiding it across her belly where the twins moved restlessly. "My academic career was fulfilling in ways I can document and analyze, but it left me empty. I was achieving success while drowning in isolation. I traded a hollow achievement for genuine belonging. That is not regret. That is the best bargain I have ever made." Magnus leaned forward and kissed her forehead, his touch reverent and careful. "You have given me everything I thought I lost the right to have. A second mate, a partner who understands both my world and herself completely, and soon, heirs who will carry both our bloodlines forward." The labor came during the full moon, as Harper had suspected it would. Shifter pregnancies frequently aligned with lunar cycles, and her Time Walker genetics had made the connection even more pronounced. Father Oswald was present, along with a midwife from the village and Beatrice, who had become something surprisingly close to a friend over the years. "The children are strong," Father Oswald observed, as Harper's body moved through the stages of transformation. "I can feel their power already." Time Walker blood is rare. To have 2 Time Walker heirs born simultaneously, this will reshape the trajectory of your territories. Harper was beyond caring about strategic implications. She was focused on survival, on bringing these children safely into the world, on enduring pain that no medieval woman should have had to endure without the modern medicine she had left behind in 2025. But she had shifter healing capacity now, and the pain, while intense, was not insurmountable. The first child emerged just after midnight, a son with Magnus's amber eyes and hair that was distinctly his father's coloring. The second child followed within minutes, a daughter with Harper's green eyes and silver-white hair that marked her unmistakably as Time Walker. "Owen," Harper whispered when they placed the boy in her arms, naming him after a warrior she had read about in medieval histories. "And Vera," she continued, looking at the daughter, "for truth. Because our story is proof that the truth is stranger and more beautiful than any fiction." Beatrice cleaned the infants with practiced efficiency, her scarred hands surprisingly gentle. "The pack will celebrate. An Alpha heir and an Omega heir, both manifested at birth. Your bloodline is extraordinarily strong." "Our bloodline," Magnus corrected, entering the chamber just as his children were being presented to their mother. His possessiveness was tempered by genuine wonder as he looked at the tiny shifters who represented the future, blessed by the moon goddess and protected by every alliance we have forged. Days later, when Harper was strong enough to receive visitors, the castle filled with well-wishers and dignitaries from neighboring packs. Griffin arrived with gifts handcrafted by the castle artisans. Father Oswald brought ancient texts, already planning the documentation of these extraordinarily rare Time Walker heirs. And the younger generation of pack members came to see the children, their presence testament to how thoroughly Harper had integrated into this world over 5 years. 3 weeks after the birth, Harper stood at the castle window with Owen in her arms and Vera sleeping against her shoulder, watching the sunset paint the medieval landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Magnus stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back, his presence a constant reassurance that this life was real and permanent. "My grandmother tried to tell me," Harper said quietly, thinking of the woman who had died 3 years before Harper's temporal displacement. She tried to explain that our family carried something ancient and powerful. She wanted me to understand my heritage before it was too late. I dismissed her as eccentric. "She would be proud of you now," Magnus said. "A Luna to a powerful Alpha King, mother of extraordinarily gifted heirs. A woman who bridged 2 worlds and made both stronger through her presence." "She would be amazed," Harper agreed, "that her granddaughter, the skeptical historian, ended up living the kind of fairy tale she tried to warn me about." That evening, as Harper settled the infants in their cradles, modern cribs that Magnus had commissioned from craftspeople once she explained the concept, she found herself processing the vast transformation of her life. 5 years ago, she had been studying these castle ruins as an academic exercise, completely divorced from the reality they represented. Now she lived within those ruins, but in a timeline where they stood pristine and functional. She had lost her career. She had lost her time. She had lost the life she had so carefully constructed around achievement and intellectual pursuit. But she had gained a family. She had gained purpose that transcended personal accomplishment. She had gained the absolute certainty that she belonged somewhere, to someone, in a way that no amount of academic recognition could ever provide. Later that night, Harper stood in the castle courtyard under the full moon, Magnus beside her. The twins were sleeping under Beatrice's watchful eye, secure in the care of the pack. Harper shifted seamlessly into wolf form, something that would have terrified her 5 years ago, but now felt as natural as breathing. Her coat was silver and white, marked with patterns that seemed to shift in the moonlight, evidence of her Time Walker heritage made manifest. Magnus transformed beside her, his gray-silver wolf form massive and powerful, his presence absolutely certain. Together, they ran through the forest adjacent to the castle, moving with the perfect synchronization of a mated pair. The pack ran with them, Beatrice and Griffin and dozens of others who had come to respect and follow this Alpha King and his Luna. The night was perfect. The moon was full. The world was quiet except for the sound of paws against earth and the distant howling of a pack celebrating the birth of heirs who would reshape their future. Harper felt the completeness of belonging in a way that no academic achievement could ever rival. She had spent her entire life chasing accomplishment and wondering why it never quite filled the emptiness inside her. Now she understood. Belonging was not something you achieved. It was something you surrendered to, something you chose despite the risk of loss, something that required vulnerability and faith, and the willingness to be fundamentally changed by connection to another being. She had crossed through time and found her home not in a place, but in a person, in a pack, in a world that had seemed impossible, until she accepted that impossibility was merely another word for destiny. The moon hung above them, witness to their joy, and Harper knew with absolute certainty that she had made the only choice that mattered.